Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And you've heard the sad news. CBC News has learned former BC NDP Premier John Horgan has died. A statement has just been released by his family. Horgan was diagnosed with cancer for a third time in June. He served as BC's longest-serving NDP premier before stepping down in 2022. He since served as Canada's ambassador to Germany. This hour, we'll take your calls about John Horgan's legacy and his life. We'll also speak with his political colleagues. Give us a call now, 1-800-825-5950. This is BC Today. As you have been hearing, CBC News has learned former BC Premier John Horgan has died. A statement has been released on behalf of the Horgan family. And it says, "Our hearts are broken to announce the passing of our beloved husband, father, and friend, John Horgan." John passed away peacefully this morning at Royal Jubilee Hospital in Victoria. The well-being of British Columbia and everyone in it was everything to him. He was surrounded by family, friends, and love in his final days. Ellie and the rest of John's family ask for privacy during this time of mourning. And a quote to end, familiar one, "Live long and prosper." We're taking your calls this hour, asking you, what are your thoughts on the life and legacy of John Horgan? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. CBC reporter Katie DeRosa joins me now. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Michelle.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I know that you've been working on this all morning. What can you tell us at this point?
Well, it really is shocking news. John Horgan was struggling with his third bout of cancer. He took a leave from his ambassadorship to Germany in June. He had actually just arrived back in Victoria on last week. And I talked to Sheena McConnell, who was his former press secretary when he was in the Premier's office, and she said she just saw him Thursday. So definitely no indications that these were his final days, and it's hitting people very hard. He was a very popular Premier. He had the gift of the gab. He was gregarious and certainly reached out across party lines with that personality. So people are shook right now, and it certainly is a sad day.
Right, and at the time, when he was diagnosed and announced his third diagnosis in June, he said, "I'm on leave from my position at the embassy in Germany and in hospital receiving immunotherapy to treat this new thyroid cancer," and had been quiet throughout the year. And he began his exit from politics, of course, last year. I don't know if you remember his farewell speech, Katie, as you said, gift of the gab, right? And that "live long and prosper" quote was certainly a favorite one of his. Can you tell us what you recall of that?
I mean, certainly the Star Trek references were always flying. During that farewell speech, I mean, there were so many people that he had to thank, right down to he, recalled, a person who he helped clean up the side of the road on the highway from Souk to Langford. He would volunteer at the local food bank in Langford. He just spent a lot of his time, he was known as John from Langford, but obviously his reach went far beyond that. He often referred to his Irish roots. He kind of joked that he'd be the ambassador to Ireland. That may have been his first pick. His parents or his family was from Cork, and he spoke a lot about his ties there. And there was really an evolution of John Horgan from NDP leader when he was in opposition. And sometimes he got the nickname Angry John because, but he kind of evolved from that to the corny dad jokes, especially during the pandemic. We heard a lot of off the cuff dad jokes from Horgan. And, some of them got him into hot water. He famously accidentally uttered the F word in the legislature. But again, he came back from that. He apologized, and, tempers get the better of you. But, I know I saw a tweet from Kevin Falcon, his political adversary, former BC Liberal, BC United leader, and he said, even though we disagreed in the legislature, we could have a laugh outside. And that was really the theme with John, is he knew how to connect with people, especially on the campaign trail. I mean, in 2020, he called a snap election, and he returned the NDP's largest ever majority. So obviously he was able to connect with voters as well as his political rivals and his political friends.
Right. And as you say, when he returned in 2020, that was a controversial decision to call that snap election. And let me just read a statement here from Premier David Eby, who, of course, succeeded John Horgan after he stepped down as premier. And the statement, part of it says, the news of John Horgan's passing this morning in Victoria leaves us with heavy hearts. John loved this province and its people. He sought to address injustice wherever he saw it, using his time in office to help build a better, stronger British Columbia for everyone. His many accomplishments as premier will be felt for years and generations to come. His achievements are too numerous to mention, but he was a consequential premier at a critical time in our history. He encouraged us all to strive to be our better selves. That statement coming from Premier David Eby this morning on the news that former BC NDP Premier John Horgan has passed at the age of 65. And Katie DeRosa is with me, CBC legislative reporter. Katie, what do you see as Horgan's legacy? He became premier after that incredibly tight 2017 election, signed a CASA agreement with the BC Green Party. Since then, what do you see as his biggest achievements?
Well, again, certainly people remember him walking into, the lieutenant governor's room or house with Andrew Weaver, signing that agreement. Even before then, him and Andrew Weaver were seen at a rugby game, and that was a little bit of a sign that they might be working together. And since then, I mean, John Horgan was proud of his legacy in terms of what the province did through COVID, what the province did for the labor movement, and so those were some of his accomplishments, as well as an accomplishment of progress for Indigenous children and signing the Declaration for the Rights of the Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Those are some of his proudest achievements, and again, he talked about the pride in bringing up some of the more junior members of the legislature. He had a very gender balanced cabinet, and there were a lot of cabinet ministers who looked to him as a mentor. Even his successor in Langford Wandafuka, Ravi Parmar, said he first met John Horgan when he was in elementary school, and John was a mentor to him ever since then. So I think that is a legacy, is how much time John would take with individuals to mentor them and just to give them his time. So I really think that was something that spoke to his character. Even with journalists, he was, friendly and again, always had the gift of the gab and an anecdote, really. He would tell you about his personal life and his kids. When he retired, he said he took a walk on the beach with Ellie and they were skipping rocks, and they said, we want to have more of this. So I mean, it is sad that he didn't get more of those moments on the beach. But again, with his wife Ellie, she was the love of his life. He would say that they marked their anniversary. They count their anniversary in hours, to the hour of when they got engaged and when they got married. So really, his relationship with his wife was on display in terms of their love, which is, who he was.
Katie, thank you very much. Certainly a significant day for British Columbians and a sad one. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle.
CBC reporter, provincial affairs reporter Katie DeRosa. And we're taking your calls, your thoughts on the passing of former BC Premier John Horgan. What do you see as his legacy? Had you ever encountered him as a British Columbian? You can give us a call and share your thoughts and your stories today. Our number is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. And a statement now from BC Conservative leader John Rustad, who writes, I am deeply saddened to hear of the passing of John Horgan. John was not just a colleague in public service, but a man of genuine warmth and integrity. Despite our political differences, I always held a deep respect for him as a person. Throughout the years, I had the opportunity to interact with John on numerous occasions. His approachable nature and willingness to engage in open dialogue were qualities I admired greatly. That coming from BC Conservative leader John Rustad, both of the major party leaders issuing statements this morning. Well, joining me now is another former BC Premier, Glenn Clark, Hi there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. I wish it was a better occasion.
I sure wish that as well. What were your own thoughts upon hearing the sad news?
Oh, it's so terrible. He's such a good guy and still really young and has been so vibrant. So big personality, silenced, and the province is worse off because of it.
What do you make of his his time, his tenure as premier? He took the province through the COVID-19 pandemic as well. What do you make of his leadership style?
Oh, it was, I mean, terrific, really. I mean, the thing I think that distinguished John more than anything else, I would say, is his authenticity. I mean, what you saw was what you got. He was just a normal human being, and he never lost sight of his roots or the people he represented. So he was genuine all the time. Even when he made a mistake, he obviously would apologize for it, and people would forgive him because he was so authentic. He wasn't a phony politician that liked to spew quick hitters. Although he was very quick, very smart, and of course had a lot of dad jokes.
What stands out for you in terms of your own interactions with him?
Well, John, I don't know if people recall this, but John worked for me when I was premier. He was a staff person
A
for me.
staffer, yeah.
Yeah, and he was such a high energy, impressive guy. We used to send him into all the problems. Anytime there was a problem, we'd send John in, and he'd try to fix it or sort it out or deal with it or come back with recommendations. So, I mean, he's been around politics a long time, and he learned a lot, I think. But one of the rare things about John Horgan, I think really rare, is he was much better in government than in opposition. He really hated being in opposition, which is kind of odd in our parliamentary system. Usually, opposition has less consequence, but in some ways, lots of fun, and you can be critical of the other side. He didn't like that at all. He really liked being in government because he got a chance to do things, and he did things. He did a lot of things. For me, the number one thing he did was get rid of money out of politics. I mean, I think that's underestimated how important that innovation, that change was in British Columbia, where no party now has a huge competitive advantage because of wealthy people buying votes. And I think that's something that hopefully is a long-term legacy from John Horgan.
I was just going to ask you about that difference between being in opposition and in government. I remember interviewing him in opposition, and certainly he was very vocal as he led the NDP there in opposition to former Premier Christy Clark's Liberal government. And certainly, he was one to really be vocal and critical. And once he went into government, how did he tackle that? There's of course, the ability to actually make change, but the responsibility as well. What was that like for him?
Yeah, I think unusual in a lot of respects. Maybe the minority government forced him, of course, and the NDP to work with the Greens and with other parties, and I think it had to temper his views. And what's so impressive was the reason he could get along with Andrew Weaver or the Conservatives or anybody was just his personality and again his genuineness, his authenticity, just being a normal person. He didn't dwell in identity politics. Sometimes he could be politically incorrect, but he always knew that he came from a place where he really meant it, where he really valued people and he really understood his constituency and understood where he came from. And so I think it was easy to like John Horgan.
He also, I'm just looking at a shot of him meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. What were relations between BC and the federal government during his time? How would you describe that?
Well, I think they were very close. Actually, I think John figured out pretty early that with Justin Trudeau, there was an opportunity to work on some big expenditure items, like big capital items that the province had been kind of underinvested in, and I think he worked hard at developing that relationship. I think near the end of his term there, he got pretty fed up with them, but as most Canadians are, but he certainly worked hard to try to keep British Columbia working with the federal government. I think, it didn't matter who was there. He would work with anybody if he thought it made a difference for British Columbia. And some of the legacy of John that I think will be played out in the years to come is this massive, I think, underappreciated, massive capital investment plan that he engaged in part with the federal government, whether it's SkyTrain extension or the Patella Bridge, or a whole bunch of other projects, which are really only under construction now and maybe halfway through completion. So
And he
he's
ended up
he
having
paid
to go
paid
ahead
it
with
back.
Site C in the end.
He did, and
Yeah.
Site C, of course, is just opening now. So those, and again, Site C was classic, John, because the NDP had opposed Site C for a whole bunch of valid reasons and concerned about it, and he made the decision, and I think he alone made the decision, really, that this was an important piece of infrastructure that had to go ahead. So he had to navigate how to change positions, really, on a big issue, and I think he did it. He did it beautifully. He did it well, and I think people related to it and understood it. And I don't think people 20 years from now will regret the fact that we built the Site C dam.
Former Premier Glenn Clark joins me now, and we are talking about the life and legacy of former BC Premier John Horgan, who has passed, who has died at the age of 65. And a statement from his family states that our beloved husband, father, and friend, John Horgan, passed away peacefully this morning at Royal Jubilee Hospital in Victoria. And they go on to write, the well-being of British Columbia and everyone in it was everything to him. He was surrounded by family, friends, and love in his final days. We are taking your calls as well, asking you for your thoughts on the passing of John Horgan. And what are your thoughts on his life and legacy? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And I'm told now that Premier David Eby will be speaking at 12:45. Just in about 20 minutes from now, we are working to get that for you live as soon as it begins. Let's take a call here from Bruce in Port Hardy. Hi, Bruce.
Hi there, how are you?
I am fine, and thank you so much for joining us. I understand you were a counselor, a municipal counselor in Port Alice.
That's right, and it's a small struggling pulp mill town. And John helped us out and had a good long conversation with him. He always had the time for people, and I'm pretty upset. I'm sorry.
My condolences
But
to you, Bruce.
I just want to say that he supported industry. He realized the New Democrats were about industry as much as anything else. And I think some people have lost sight of that recently, but we won't get into that. But I just want to say this. As a counselor, I spent 15 minutes with him, and he was a very busy man. He was just an MLA at the time. And I came away with knowledge of his warmth and friendliness. And that's all I want to say. Condolences to his family. Thank you.
Bruce, do take care. Do take care. Thank you so much for hanging on the line to join us. And my condolences to you as you feel the loss of John Horgan. That's Bruce calling us from Port Hardy. Let me just go back quickly to Glenn Clark here. He really was, in that area, on the island, Langford, Juan de Fuca, it really was, as I called it a few weeks ago during the election, John Horgan country. He really had that connection locally.
He really did. And that riding, of course, has rural and logging in it, and it has a city, an urban center. And so it was a nice microcosm of the province. And I think that's probably why he did appeal to working people a bit more than we've seen in the recent past. I mean, he really won areas all over the province because of his commitment to trying to get a right balance between environment and industry, between urban and rural. And he worked hard at that. He really believed in that. And I think that's another sad thing to see change.
Glenn, are you okay to join us till 12:30?
Yes, that's fine. Sure.
Thank you very much for that. Let's take another call here now. And we are taking your calls this hour here on BC Today on the passing of former BC Premier John Horgan. What to you is his legacy for British Columbians? The longest serving BC NDP Premier, serving for 5 years, and coming to the office and taking government in 2017 in that very tight race, tight election with the BC Liberals, and at the time signing the confidence and supply agreement with the BC Green Party. And what to you was his legacy, his achievement, and what to you is his legacy? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Christine is calling us now from Vancouver. Hi, Christine, welcome.
Hi. really sad to hear the passing of John Horgan. My name is Christine Smith Martin, and I'm the CEO of an organization called Coastal First Nations. And his loss and the loss is felt tremendously through all of our coastal communities. John was a person to be reckoned with. He would tell you in no uncertain terms. He wouldn't fluff anything up, but he was such a strong advocate. And you mentioned some of the Indigenous pieces that he's done, and it's a really sad day today. I think we're all really feeling it at the eve of when the swearing in of the NDP that's happening tomorrow. I'm sure that they will pay respects, but my also connection is our dance group was East Vancouver Dance Group, and John wanted us to be over there for the first time ever, drumming in the NDP was our dance group. There was probably at least 80 of us, from elders all the way to children, and every single one of them felt like John really knew them, and that was his gift, to really ensure that you are heard, whether it's an Indigenous community or an individual person or to the youngest child that was there that day. He was very strong in making sure that these pieces, and it's such a sad day today. I'm really sorry, and condolences to his family and I think all British Columbians, because he was very strong, he was very confident, and we're sure going to miss him.
Thank you so much for your call, Christine. Really, really good to hear from you. Christine Smith Martin, the CEO of the Coastal First Nations. And as she was referring to as well, besides her her personal interactions with former Premier Horgan, talking about DRIPA as well, the Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And that was something that the NDP provincial government brought into law in November 2019. It's just about 12:28 now. This is BC Today. We are getting a lot of emails as well. And here is one from Helen, who writes, I was at a ceremony for awarding the Order of BC to a friend a few years ago. It was a suitably serious ceremony, and Mr. Horgan, as Premier, was speaking of the accomplishments of those being awarded the order. A child started crying out, and any speaker might have ignored or dismissed the interruption, but Mr. Horgan stopped what he was saying, smiled, and said, referring to the child, that that's who we were doing the good work for and preparing for all children's future. It was such a warm, sincere, and genuine response. What a lovely story. Thank you very much for that story, Helen. And Van writes us from Victoria as well. I'm devastated, she writes, and going on to say, I worked with John for MP Lynn Hunter. He was a joy and a friend. We, the people, will miss him greatly. Lots of emails coming in. And Ben writes as well, although I did not agree with the former premier on a lot of issues, I do give him full credit for his pragmatic approach to resource development in this province, especially regarding the Site C and LNG expansion. In the face of vigorous opposition, he did not let ideology blur his judgment regarding these two important issues. That's from Ben at bctoday@cbc.ca. You can email us to bctoday@cbc.ca or call us. Let us know what are your thoughts on the life and legacy of John Horgan. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or just hit pound 690 on your mobile device. And former BC Premier as well, Glenn Clark, is with me now. Some final thoughts from you today.
No, it's those lovely stories. I mean, he touched so many people. Common sense and a common touch, and just a genuine human being. He really warm, a real warm human being that we will be missed.
My condolences to you as well today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
That is former BC Premier Glenn Clark. We'll continue to take your calls, and we plan to carry live BC Premier David Eby speaking in about 15 minutes from now. We'll hear from Times columnist reporter Les Lane as well in a few minutes. Right now, let's pause for a CBC News update, and here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. As we've been hearing on the show, tributes are pouring in from across the country for former BC Premier John Horgan. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Horgan saw public service as a privilege, as a way to help others and make our country better. Horgan passed away this morning after battling thyroid cancer. John Horgan was 65 years old. Operations at BC ports will soon be at full levels after Ottawa announced it's stepping in to stop the lockout here and in Montreal. Binding arbitration will be imposed to force both sides to reach a settlement. Business leaders say with a new U.S. president about to take office, it's crucial Canada is seen as a reliable and cost-effective trading partner. And BC health officials are continuing to investigate what's believed to be the first human case of avian influenza in Canada. Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry says the teenage patient is seriously ill. Washington State has confirmed 11 cases of humans infected with avian flu, with another 3 cases considered probable. And now the forecast. Rainfall and wind warnings are in effect for several sections of the BC coast and Vancouver Island. On the north coast, a chance of showers with a high of 9. Highs around -2 with a chance of flurries this afternoon in the Peace. In the central interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 5. Highs to 7 degrees with a chance of showers in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 9. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, a chance of showers this afternoon with highs to 10 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today here on CBC. We're live on Radio 1, on CBC Television, and live streaming as well. Lots of emails and statements being put out now on the death of former BC Premier John Horgan. He was diagnosed for a 3rd time with cancer in June, and at the time he said he was leaving his post as Canada's ambassador to Germany to receive treatment. And a statement from the family says he passed away peacefully at Royal Jubilee Hospital in Victoria this morning, surrounded by family, friends, and love in his final days. They are asking for privacy during this time of mourning. But many are sharing their own stories, and we have some emails here. Heather writes, I'm grateful that we had John Horgan as our premier at such a critical period in BC. His leadership during the pandemic gave me confidence that our government was looking after our best interest and saved countless lives and suffering. May he rest in peace from his labors. Eric writes from Vernon, sad news indeed. Canada needs more John Horgans to lead us away from the current trend of global politics, as we have just witnessed in the United States. And a statement as well from the BC Greens, and former BC Green MLA Adam Olsen reflected on Premier Horgan's leadership. He wrote in a statement, John Horgan will be remembered as a leader who worked hard every day for the people of BC. John was steadfast in his belief that the government can work better to put people first. BC is a better place for having had him as premier. Lots more of your calls and emails to come throughout this half hour. Also waiting for Premier David Eby to speak live. This is BC Today here on CBC. And as you've been hearing in the news, former Premier of British Columbia, John Horgan, who had been serving as Canada's ambassador to Germany, has died. And his family posted a statement on X this morning that he passed away peacefully at Royal Jubilee Hospital in Victoria on Tuesday morning. And he is survived by his wife, Ellie, and their 2 sons, Evan and Nate. Taking your calls on the life and legacy of John Horgan. And we are now joined by the leader of the BC Green Party, Sonia Furstenau. Sonia, thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah, you're welcome.
My condolences to you, and please let us know what thoughts are running through your mind right now.
Well, my thoughts are first and foremost with his family, with John's family, his wife and sons, and, the terrible loss of losing their family member, their dad, their husband. And I think that it's a moment for all of us to reflect on how important it is to keep that humanity and humanizing our politics. Everybody who's elected to office tries to do their very best, and I think John Horgan is an example of someone who dedicated his life to public service and worked very hard to do the very best he could for British Columbia. And so today is a day for all of us to reflect on that toll of service and to recognize the deep humanity that goes into playing a role like being premier of a province.
What are some moments where you saw his deep humanity?
You know, I remember the early days of the minority government in 2017, and he would come into the chamber with a big smile on his face. And he often said, you know, the worst day in government is better than the best day in opposition. He really reveled in those years of being able to deliver so much for BC. And when we saw what happened in those 3.5 years, you know, we passed the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act unanimously in the House. We saw the introduction of the $10 day daycare. We saw the introduction of a climate plan for BC, and in the early months of the pandemic, a real coming together under the leadership that he was demonstrating of all parties in the legislature. So that was a time of real consensus building and unity, and he was so happy to be part of that moving forward together as a province, and the way that he expressed that and showed his delight in being able to do good work.
We're showing some footage now from 2017 when that agreement, the confidence and supply agreement, was signed with then BC Green Party leader Andrew Weaver. You talk about consensus building. If you reflect on his legacy as a politician who built consensus and cooperation, how do you see that moving forward in the BC legislature as it begins?
It's a lesson for all of us, and it's important for us to recognize that when politicians focus on what connects us as opposed to what divides us, people feel more certain that they're being served well, and I think that's what we should be recognizing is so necessary right now. Come together, solve problems, show that government can work on behalf of people, that government can fix things, can make things better. That was what he was really committed to in that period, and I think that that's a lesson for all politicians right now.
Sonia Furstenau, really appreciate your calling, and my condolences to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
That's Sonia Furstenau calling us from Victoria, leader of the BC Greens. Ingmar is our next caller now in Bella Bella. Hi there, Ingmar.
How are you?
I am okay, and I understand you met John Horgan a few times.
I did. We had a tree sit going at the side of the highway there that was blockading the then proposed route of the Bear Mountain Parkway, which was just happened to be about a 10-minute walk from John Horgan's office when he was an MLA. And I do remember that although we butted heads quite a lot with John and he disagreed profoundly with what we were doing, we were there to protect what little remained of the Garry Oak ecosystem, Canada's most endangered biogeoclimatic zone. And but John did come out and met us a few times, which is more than I could say for a lot of the politicians that we've fought over the years over environmental issues. And at one point, we had won the mineral rights. There had been a lapse with the former, with the Bear Mountain project. They had let their mineral rights lapse, and one of our tree sit members noticed this, and we quickly grabbed all the mineral rights for Bear Mountain. And although that was something that was very perplexing to the developer at the time, John Horgan did give us credit for for thinking fast on our feet. But
That was your activism.
yeah, and I actually, as a result of that, when the BC leadership campaign for the NDP was happening, I actually encouraged John to write. I wrote to him and encouraged him to run. Now, as a leader, I'd have to say that as a lover of primeval forests and a forest defense activist all my life, John was a real disappointment. He allowed a very significant ramp up of, just like David Eby, of the destruction of what little remains of BC's primeval forests, and basically allowed the RCMP to go in and beat up forest defenders of all walks of life out at Fairy Creek and places like that. So. And then he went on to support the Site C dam when he promised against that. We voted for him because he was going to defeat Site C, and he switched and went on to that. And then at the end of his career, he retired as a premier and became a coal baron, and before he became the ambassador to Germany. So, I like John Horgan, and I'm sad to see him go, but I'm not quite as fawning as most of your callers.
I appreciate your call, and you're talking about arrests during blockades to prevent old-growth logging on southern Vancouver Island, along many other things there, and that was part of the time during which the tail end, I believe, of Horgan's time, and then subsequently David Eby, as you were saying. But those are all criticisms that have existed, right, under Horgan's premiership. So we appreciate your call and contributing to the conversation as well, Ingmar. In fact, we're joined by Les Lane, who is a Times columnist reporter, joining us now from Victoria, just as we wait for David Eby to speak. And Les, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, we're having a little bit of echo as just now, Les, with you. But I'm going to ask you a question, and hopefully we can fix the echo. But just jumping off of that last call there, and those were some of the conflicts that Premier John Horgan faced during his time in government, the resource development, as well as environmental protection. How do you think, what is your assessment of how he handled those conflicts?
He handled it. He was kind of wide open and everything.
Right. My apologies, Les. There is still the technical issue. I'm really hoping we can fix that because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I really am sorry about that. We'd love to hear from you. Les Lane is, of course, Times columnist and reporter in Victoria. We are trying to connect with him to get his thoughts on John Horgan's time as Premier in BC and trying to address those issues, those conflicts around resource development, forestry, and the protection of old-growth forests as well. A statement now from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on X, and Trudeau wrote, John Horgan believed in the power of public service. He saw it as a privilege, as a way to help others and make our country better. He loved British Columbia. As Premier, he had a tenacity, passion, and dedication for his work that very few could match. Through the pandemic, through wildfires and floods, through everything, he led with courage and warmth. He was a true progressive, a leader in climate action. And that's a statement from Justin Trudeau. And it goes on to say affordable childcare and reconciliation. He championed the economy and clean energy and advocated for workers. He always believed we would get more done if we worked together. That is a statement from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just a few moments ago. We are working to connect once again with Les Lane and in Victoria, and we're hoping that that connection has improved. Can we try it again? Okay, we are going to try and connect with Les on the phone as we also wait now for BC Premier David Eby to speak and share his thoughts on the passing of John Horgan. Again, the longest-serving BC NDP Premier has died, and some notes as well now that we're getting on our email. I'm just going to pull them up for you. We're getting a lot of emails Our address again is bctoday@cbc.ca. Martha writes, I had the privilege of meeting John a few times as an educator in the Souk School District. He was always open to coming to speak to students about politics and British Columbia and Canada. His humor, warm, and open approach to students had them ask a wide variety of questions. He never leaned in one direction or another. He spoke from the heart. I remember my uncle, Dan Jarvis, a former Liberal MLA, saying that John was one of the best guys to work with at the legislature. The last time I spoke to him personally was just before he threw his hat in to be leader of the NDP. I asked him if he was considering it, and with a twinkle in his eye, he just winked and said, "You never know." I was thrilled when he did. He will be remembered by all BC as an open and honest leader who only wanted the best for the province and his people. Thank you very much for your email, Martha. bctoday@cbc.ca. Let's go now live to David Eby.
It's with heavy hearts. We learned about the passing of John Horgan this morning. John was a remarkable man, both in the history of this province and just who he was as a person. His legacy for British Columbia is profound. In terms of law, he was the premier who brought in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, among countless other legislative accomplishments. Politically, for the NDP, he brought us from 16 years in opposition in the political wilderness into the government benches for the first time in a generation. And I think for many British Columbians, he made them think differently about politics and about politicians. He was accessible, he was fun and funny, and he was called Premier Dad, and rightly so. For myself, he was a coach and a mentor. He was an inspiration to me. He had advice when I needed it. He conducted himself with the utmost in integrity, and he brought a spirit of fun to his work that was infectious. And many of you will remember too, he had a bit of a temper from time to time. And if you hadn't been yelled at by John Horgan, then you hadn't truly worked with him. I truly worked with John Horgan. Personally, he was a private guy. We all knew of his profound love for Ellie at 45 years together. He spoke so affectionately of her, and their love was very present. And their two sons, Nate and Evan, were his pride and joy. Family was a huge priority for John. The Horgan family shared John with British Columbia, and now with his passing, we all grieve along with the Horgan family. I know I felt like one of John's relatives. I think everyone who worked with him felt that closeness of family, and yet we weren't family. Their grief is profound, and our hearts go out to them. In terms of the legislature, the flag will be at half-mast to commemorate John's passing. The relevant government officials will work with the Horgan family to provide members of the public an opportunity to offer their condolences here at the legislature, and with a formal service to recognize his contributions to British Columbia and to British Columbians as he worked to make their lives better every single day he served in this place. Thank you.
You spent a lot of time with him. Other than him yelling at you, are there any moments and stories that stand out in your mind?
I think for me, for John, the piece that I looked at in awe about was his ability to turn what was a clear political liability moment into a political asset. So I remember the story that he told many times. I'm sure you've heard him tell the story about knocking over the water glass in the meeting with the Prime Minister, and then turning that into, the discussion was about pipelines, and saying, well, this is how easily spills can happen. When he was, there was an issue about freedom of information on phones. And he said, and he just pulled his phone out of his pocket and unlocked it and offered to pass it around to the press gallery so they could all have a look at what was on his phone, what apps he had installed. There was a word game that he particularly liked. He was in the legislature and he lost his temper briefly with the leader of the opposition, and he used an unfortunate turn of phrase that was unparliamentary. And he turned it into a moment where all British Columbians could relate with just losing their cool and using what we call at our house rough language. He had the ability to take those moments where it was a tough moment or it was just maybe a little embarrassing and make people just love him more. And for me, that really encapsulates who he was. Thanks, everybody.
That's BC Premier David Eby speaking at the legislature and announcing that the flag there will be pulled at half-mast to honor John Horgan's passing, and that there will be an opportunity for British Columbians to come to the legislature and offer their condolences, and there will be a formal service being planned as well. Let's go now to Les Lane, who is patiently waiting on the phone. Hi, Les.
Hi, how are you?
I
think the mix-up there was at my end. Sorry.
No, not at all. Don't you worry. I'm sure every one of us has had one of those moments. I'd love to go to what David Eby had to say there, but just to start with, a lot of the criticism or what people are conflicted about with Horgan's legacy is going to be around the conflict between environmental protection and industry and resource extraction. What are your thoughts on how he handled those conflicts?
Yeah, that's been a never-ending kind of issue or breakpoint in BC and I guess everywhere else for a generation now. And I think John Horgan handled it as best anyone could, and he had time, I think more time than say the current administration for the loggers and the miners. He was unabashedly supportive of resource extraction, did the best he could for it, and it's a very tough fight these days. But he held his own in some of those battles. He took a lot of flack from the other side of that never-ending question, and he stood his ground for the most part. It's never going to be solved. There's always going to be an argument whenever anyone tries anything in BC in that field. But he held his own, and he had a kind of feel for the hard hats, the people that are out there driving dirty pickup trucks. I think he left the impression that he was on their side to the extent that he could be.
We heard David Eby say there, if you haven't yelled at by John Horgan, you haven't felt his presence. And he said, I felt his presence. And he had that reputation, right, for being pugnacious as well as being as open and gregarious as he was. What are your own personal reflections having covered him?
Yeah, very much so. I think the one striking thing about John Horgan was his nickname was Angry John for 4 years in the legislature when he was opposition leader. It was a very frustrating term. He was going up against Christy Clark, who just completely shocked the NDP to the core by beating Adrian Dix in the election in 2013. They were all resentful about that to start with. And John Horgan walked in, took over as opposition leader. First of all, he refused the job. I'm too old. I can't do it. We need some fresh blood. There was nobody else around to do it. So he was led by acclamation and took the job very reluctantly. And in that context, he was basically as miserable with reporters from time to time as Premier Eby indicated he was with caucus members. We had some very tough moments. I had a few just minor clashes now. They didn't amount to anything. But yeah, he left very heated, kind of nasty exchanges, and then it would blow over and we'd carry on. But the striking thing about John Horgan was what power did to him. And power doesn't have a good effect on a lot of people, but he absolutely blossomed as premier and just became completely engaging person. He'd still blow up a little bit from time to time. But I think Sonia Furstenau, I heard her a few minutes ago saying that he was saying the worst day as premier is still better than the best day as opposition leader. And he really struck me what a remarkable difference it had in his personality when he became Premier BC for 3 short years.
Interesting that Glenn Clark mentioned that as well, that he much preferred governing as opposed to being in opposition. Thank you so much for the history that you brought and the context you brought to this, Les. Thank you.
Yeah, nice to talk to you.
Nice
Take
to
care.
talk to you. I have one last caller here. I only have 2 minutes, Elaine, but I know you have a lot to say, so let's make sure we get to you. Hi, Elaine in Port Moody.
Hi.
Go ahead. What do you remember of John Horgan?
Well, what I remember mostly about John Horgan was his marvelous idea. It was called the Protected Area Strategy, and the goal of this plan was to preserve 12% of all the land in BC as parks, because it's important to, you're going to protect the species that live in this province if you protect the land that they live on. And we thought this was an absolutely grand strategy. I belonged to a group called the Burke Mountain Naturalists in Coquitlam, and we had a park. We had a place for people like to hike called Burke Mountain, and we thought this would be an ideal place to create a new park because so many people were moving to Vancouver. And so we got out and we campaigned very hard for, I think, probably at least a couple of years, if not more, to get Pinecone Burke Park protected. And indeed, it was protected. I think that was in 1996. And we have many other areas in the Lower Mainland and across BC that were protected.
And you see that as his legacy?
Yes, I think that's a huge legacy for the people of this province and people who like to, who appreciate nature and all the gifts that nature provides to us. It was very important.
Elaine, glad you got on the show. Thank you very much. That's Elaine in Port Moody. And lots more emails coming in to BC Today. And we have another one here from Paul, who writes, regardless of your political leanings, I think all of us are in agreement that our province has lost a truly great British Columbian who worked hard for each and every one of us. Thank you very much for your email, Paul. bctoday@cbc.ca. We'll continue to take them and much more coverage on the death of former Premier John Horgan.